Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Van Alen Institute for the last program of a very busy week. I'm happy we have a good crowd here today. I see some new faces, so it's probably good to tell you a little bit about what Van Alen is and what we do. We're a 120-year-old architecture and design organization, and we do three things mainly. We do public programs like this, but we also organize design competitions, and we do many of those, from very small projects to for installations to giant landscape projects. And we do research. And Anne can speak more on that later on over drinks. She's cooking up a very interesting project on the relationship between addiction and urban spaces. So hold on tight for that early next year. This is a new space, as you can probably smell, because they're still painting. Also on days that there are a lot of people coming through the doors are wet. So I hope that you're all careful when you're leaving. It's a space designed by Collective LOK. There are three good designers, and I think in this room actually many people will know some of the designers. John Lott, Michael Kubo, and Liam O'Brien Jr. I think they did a fantastic job. It's a very nice space. We'll be running our events here in the back. Smaller events will be able to run up front. And this long wall here is going to be a projection surface for commissioned video works about architecture, cities, design, and so on. That I still need to raise $50,000 or $70,000 for. So if you have a big wallet, leave it here before you go. We're running our event today, and I think it's going to be an interesting session on escape routes for the city. And the reason why we're looking at this is basically all of our week and all of our past year and a half has been focused on issues of escape. What does it mean to live in cities? And very often it means that we're thinking about, okay, how can we get out of here? And you cannot always get out of here physically, either because we don't have the time or the money. So we need to sometimes get out of here in a mental way. Today we're looking at escape routes with a group of very cool young architects, and I'm happy that you're here. You've been making escape routes that basically take us to escape venues in the city, or give a sense of a reflection of escape in the city. So let's see what you come up with. Since this is also the end of the final or of all the reviews in school, we're going to run it as a review. There's nothing up on the wall, but we'll have it up here. So we'll do immediate responses after each of the sessions, which I think is going to be quite fun. So I hope you're all going to participate in that. To introduce our speakers for today, our presenters and designers, and raise your hand so that everybody knows who you are. Rosalyne Shieh of SCHAUM and Shieh, very good, welcome. Mitch, McEwen, very good, here, great, thank you for joining. Peter Zuspan, Wolff, Alessandro Orsini, and Michael Chen. And then, of course, there's no review without a group of good panelists. We have Mark Gardner here. Mark is an architect, and he's one of the co-chairs of our programs committee. So we're glad to have you here today. And Guiney, a design critic, and these days our director of research. Matt Shaw for Architizer, so glad you're here too. And Alexandra Lange, also a design and architecture critic. And I'm going to not be quiet and shy either. So let's get started with Rosalyne. You're taking the floor, and then we go down the list. The next person after that is Mitch. We do responses immediately after the presentations. And I know that architects always run over. So we've told you get 7 minutes, but at 10 minutes we're really going to cut you off. Good. Let's get started.
So we propose that one need not leave physically. One need not physically leave in order to escape. We're grounded in a place by how we perceive it, rather. So say, here's a street, a place for walking, along which I move towards a destination. I'm kind of just describing how it is that you inhabit the city. I turn and I come face to face with the building, which is my mirror, my door. I pass through and settle into myself, my home. So, and that's, I think, the way in which we experience being in the city, which is this kind of mirroring of ourselves, and we kind of see through it. So in order to escape the city, we propose to disengage it with the housing of the body, or its identification with the self. The city is a bundle of means to many ends, which string together into a quotidian rhythm. There is, on the other hand, the big thing that is the city, what Italian architect Aldo Rossini described as the city seen as a gigantic man-made object, a work of engineering and architecture that is large and complex and growing over time. So this description of the city rivals it with that of large geological elements like canyons, deltas, or mountain peaks. It telescopes our view outwards in a way, highlighting the large-scale object and tears us from it as an enveloping habitat. We escape the quotidian instrumental view of the city when we view it this way. So to that end, we propose 5 projects that reveal New York City as a geological object. What follows is 5 natural conditions and 5 architectural environmental interventions that transpose the natural conditions onto the city. So the first one here is Sea of Clouds. You're above the cloud cover, the ground drops away, and the body replaces the ground as an anchor. So by flooding the narrow street with the mist and crossing over with lightly hung bridges, the rooted and defined streets of New York are released from their ground, and one floats above, moving free from the street grid, each individual finding a relative ground at their center of movement. The second one is alpenglow, which is an effect where indirect atmospheric light reaches from below the horizon and lights up a mountain peak, creating an eerie illumination. So as dusk deepens, a cool rectangle of light emerges along the street, tracing a block that traverses several buildings. A single shape made up of city fabric emerges subtly, becoming brightest when the night reaches its darkest, and then with a flash would go out. So tracing the top edges of the buildings, you can see the line along the cornices, tracing the edge of the deep valley of the street, uniting fragments of several buildings into a single shape, like the rim of a canyon. The artificial brightness intensifies the shadows from which you're looking out at the lighted patch. The mirror lake. A glassy lake flips an image about the horizon. So a single pane of mirrored glass doubles and extends the existing city, both the inhabitants and its space. The horizon is flipped into the vertical, which is the direction of urbanity. There's a displacement of the self in reflection, but also a displacement of the surroundings. So you're separated from yourself, and when you put something at a distance, it becomes something that you can study and see rather than be immersed in. The mirage. Hot and cold air bend light rays to reflect the sky into the ground, projecting an image of water, always at a distance, even as the body moves towards it, never reaching it. Heat haze obscures vision, heightening the senses of the body. Sounds of the city echo through the haze, turning known sounds into strange musical noise.
Rosalyne, speak up a little bit because it's...
Okay,
yeah.
And the final one is a field of heather. So fields of color block out the landscape, making the sky seem wider and the ground more expansive. So unnaturally colored, brilliant fields of color sway in the wind, causing motion in the foreground, offsetting the colors in the distance, and making the faraway masses seem especially still and monumental. These 5 proposals set up a constellation of destinations within the city that prompt the traveler, whether foreign or native, to discover a wild New York City. Rather than an itinerary, they are more like 5 edges of escape. To see and sense differently, to access an unseen New York City. It's about going in to get out through 5 moments in which the familiar is intensified and the city becomes strange. Conceived of as a wilderness, teeming with unidentified species, the city is revealed to have the qualities of a sublime nature. So
Yoo-hoo! Let's keep it on the images for a little bit. And usually when you're in school, it's
I need to stand up.
why don't you grab the chair at the corner? That's yeah. In school, it's only the critic saying something, but it's a Sunday afternoon, and I think we have a nice crowd. So I'm going to ask everybody to participate, but I think it's probably the easiest to start with our row of critics here. And see what you think of this nicely poetic series of proposals. But I should add, There was no budget that's for execution of all of these projects. People were completely free in what they could come up with. So yeah, I'm excited to see where it's all going to head this afternoon. Alexandra, she's on the tip of her...
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you here went up to the glass house and saw the veil installation. Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Here, we also have a mic.
Well, I'll try to bring it. Hi. Hello. Okay.
You're all. Try again.
All right. Hi.
Don't you?
No, not working. I can just try to stand up.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so I'm sure many of you went up to the glass house this year and saw the veil installation, which was a mist that was projected by thousands of tiny nozzles around Philip Johnson's glass house. And I just did my end of year's awards, and I gave it an award for best atmospheric effect. And I feel like this project
Was it an
really,
official award?
well, we make up our own awards and then we give them to you. It's the best way to do it, and there are no numbers. So I feel like this project is great because it really continues that idea of an atmospheric effect as a new category of architecture, and I appreciate that. And I also feel like this maybe starts a new genre, which one might call, Photoshop escapes, because kind of, I mean, this last one is the best example, because these are kind of the sorts of things. I mean, you said the grasses were going to be artificially colored, right? So that's the kind of thing, you can do with your filters in Instagram and make it seem like you were somewhere really cool, but this is making that into a real thing that you can go visit. And I think we're going to see more and more of this kind of work that filters things back into real life.
And I see a lot of nodding.
No, I was just thinking, it strikes me also as very romantic in the old-fashioned sense of the world, almost like 19th century romantic, and it's sort of bringing back like wild, strange nature into the city again. That, I guess we've banished whether or not, that's true, or you agree with that or not. But then ultimately, when it boils right down to it on a simple level, it also seems like you're asking people just to look up in this nice way. Very, very simple. I mean, I think everyone in this room has probably had that experience of, walking down, 6th Avenue or some equally pretty straightforward street in New York City, and people are looking up and you're like, what are they doing? What are they doing? And there'll be some strange cloud formation or something. And all of a sudden the pedestrian, truly banal 6th Avenue that you walk up and down every single day is strange, and it's beautiful again, and it's as if you're marshaling that thinking and that energy and just sort of having people lift their heads up a bit.
Guess it's my turn. It's interesting because sometimes I think about how we've become so jaded in a way about, we've seen everything kind of thing, or, too much what Alexandra's saying, the sort of Photoshop thing, you can make all these different Instagram, but to take those moments in the city where you can have something like this that truly displaces you and makes you realize that the otherness of, being in this place within the city and how different it can be is a wonderful thing. I think of, it can be such a simple gesture, like there's a project I think Michael Sorkin did that was just an image of a tree stuck in the middle of the cross-section of the avenue and the street. Just a tree. And how different and strange it is. That it's the thing that you don't sort of expect that makes you see the city in a different way. Right? So,
I think that's
yeah, I wanted to maybe expand on the idea of the romanticism of this project. There's a movie, it's a 1981 John Carpenter movie called Escape from New York, and ironically,
Not very romantic.
I don't want to give too much away because I think everyone should see it. It's kind of an amazing film, but It ironically also takes place completely in New York City, which when you think about escaping, but then it's in New York City. And the reason that the movie is so powerful is because it sort of reinterprets the existing city as a series of dystopian places, but you still recognize them as the city. And so I appreciate this in a sort of romantic sense of just maybe displacing us atmospherically, but also the image of the city remains, so that we get this sort of like otherness of the place we're in, to reinterpret what we know into something we don't know, which is an interesting form of escape, I guess.
And on the movie conversation, or just to add to that, perhaps not very helpfully, but that movie, I think it's I Am Legend, or what's the Will Smith movie, the zombie movie? But, so, you know, he's the last guy in New York, and, you know, except for the zombies, of course. But the most, for me, magical image of the entire movie, the reason to see the movie, is the herd of deer tromping through Times Square. It's fantastic. So it's very much like that.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're in the park surrounded by blue waves, you know, it's like it's obscuring part of the city, but not the other part, with a looking up part, maybe.
I actually think I'm responding most to, you know, within this project, to the ones that it's like you took Aldo Rossi and then you went to the mountains and then you kind of made the mountains architectural again. And what I mean by that is the one where you project the alpine glow, but it's rectangular onto the buildings, and the one that's just a sheet of glass, which is, you know, modern architecture at its essence. So you've made these atmospheric effects, these romantic effects, actually back into architecture, and I think that, like, having that edge to it makes it the most interesting. You know, you're not projecting a cloud of pink light; it's a rectangle of pink light, and I think that's super important. You know, if you were to deploy it, to keep that kind of like, you know, it just makes it adds a little frisson to the whole.
I have one question for Rosalyne. So how would it be? I think this may have gone off. Let's see. There, it's back. New Yorkers are all in all difficult people. So what would happen with some of these installations? So I can imagine that instead of like this nice reflective surface, especially since it looked like it was Soho, would be turning into a giant wall where people could redo their hair, their makeup, and all of that. And then I was also wondering, like, I love the rectangle of light, but I would not like to live there. I'm going to be the bad guy, clearly, in the conversation. So how would we sell that to people? I think we made it a new battery.
I think I like this idea that people would be rearranging their hair, because the same thing with like producing a new, like kind of what you're saying is like actually it's not natural, it's totally artificial, and in those cases that you pointed out, it's actually very architectural. We're not pointing at something, we're actually making something that then points at something. But what's nice about the fact that people might be rearranging their hair is that then you actually start to tap into the kind of habits of the wild animals that live in New York City, which are these kinds of...
The wild animals, that's what we are.
Or like the residents, right, start to react to it in a different way, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah. Good. Let's see, any questions from, or remarks from the audience here? What would you do if you were living on this block with the lights shining into your apartment?
Stand in front of it every day.
Good, if there's no other points, then we go on to the next presentation, which was... Let's do a round of applause for Rosalyne. The next one is Mitch, and I think we go from the poetic to a fairly serious topic. Is that right?
Is that dialectic?
No, we go from a very poetic to a very serious topic, eh?
I'm asking you if that's dialectic.
I think it's good.
Okay. Do I take the mic? Does it work? No, I don't take the mic if it doesn't work. Okay, so this is being called very serious because in a way it's a kind of, I'm dedicating this to Eric Gardner. I'm positioning this within time more than space in many ways. And one of the ways that I'm positioning this within time is this moment of the protests around Ferguson, and also around Staten Island, the death of Eric Gardner, police violence. And in some ways this relates to writing that I've done recently that should be coming out in Studio Magazine in Italy, their illegal issue about the kind of illegality of black leisure in New York City and how that kind of, it precedes zoning, it precedes urban planning in terms of the policy tools, things like cabaret laws. But so what I'm doing for this talk is tracing an itinerary. It's very temporal. And it's an itinerary that I think taps into modes of escape that, rather than the kind of 20th century history of escape from the city, which I think in a way you can trace back to late 19th century fears around tenement houses, at least here on the East Coast, right? You have late 19th century fears about tenement houses combined with phobias around Jewish and Italian populations, which then of course precede the 1916 zoning. And then you have the mid 20th century white flight and the kind of subsidy of the suburbs. So I think we have a legacy of relating escape from the city to a kind of dispersal. And so I was looking for ways, in addition to wanting to pay homage to this moment, I was looking for ways to connect escape to intensity within the city and intensification of connections, so that escape and kind of density and intensity could support each other. So that's how we get to escape routes, Black Lives Matter. And so effectively, it really is, if I can get it to click.
Point here.
Point this,
yeah.
Point this way, okay. Okay, so we start at 10 a.m. I suggest 10 a.m. on a Friday. This will lead us to other moments later. So we started at Wall Street, actually. This was, historically, there are many reasons for that, but it's also just a good point of the ferry. You get to pass through the Smith-Miller-Hawkinson, Pier 11, and pick up the East River Ferry at 10 a.m., which will take you to downtown Brooklyn. There's an alternative. I actually highly suggest for those who are able to carry 35 pounds and their arms are on their back to actually buy this kayak. If there is a budget, this kayak costs between $300 and $600. It will become relevant more later. 10:05, we're already at Brooklyn Bridge. If you do have the kayak, you have the option of teaming up or kind of just maybe skirting around these folks who do this on a regular basis. It's called the free walk tour, and they kayak themselves. You can pretend to be one of them for a moment for that 5 minutes that it takes you to get to Brooklyn Bridge Park, which I won't even show because we've all been there and we love it.
They call it a free walk tour?
Yeah, it's a free walk tour. Yeah, maybe I'm speaking too fast.
Yeah.
Okay, from there, from Brooklyn Bridge Park, with the 35-pound kayak, or not, you walk to 75 Hicks Street, which takes about 10 minutes. And there, this is one of the most kind of prominent stops on the Underground Railroad. It was a site of abolitionism. And one of the important things to note is that abolitionism, New York didn't outlaw slavery actually until 1827. And so the kind of what we think of as the Underground Railroad really happened over the course of only a couple decades. New York was actually a very dangerous place to be passing through as a black person in the first half of the 19th century. But this was a location of a lot of organizing between Quakers, and this was not a Quaker meeting for Worship House, but this was connected with the Hicks. So we spend, I think, an hour there just to kind of soak it in, right? And then keep walking. This is a longer walk. This is why if you're going to go the kayak route, I said, be fit, right? Okay, so we walked to 227 Duffield Street, which for those of you who are familiar with the Atlantic Yards, the proposal, the protests around it, the shop, the Geary, the confusion, the Amanda Burden, all of this, right? 227 Duffield Street became important around 2007 because it was discovered that it was a very prominent location in the Underground Railroad. There was a family called the Trussells, I believe, who lived there. And it's believed, but never kind of proven, at least with drawings that you and I can believe, that there was actually a connection between three houses underground, a kind of tunnel that broke through the lot lines. So there was an attempt to actually do an archaeological study, but kind of development pressures were stronger than the kind of desire for history. But what did succeed was there's a new street sign. It's not Photoshop. There's no Photoshop in the whole thing. Abolitionist Place is part of Duffield Street, and this is the house. But what's confusing to me, I'm not a historian, is that actually there was a moment of making this a museum, So 227abolitionist.org was the place for that. You spend a good 20 minutes just trying to figure that out. Partially because you really can't get any information online. If you go to 227abolitionist.org, which was supposed to be the website for what was supposed to be the museum in this house that might have had a tunnel, this is what you get right now. If you translate this, it's something about pipes. I don't really know. It has nothing to do with
pipes, tunnels.
No, it's not. It actually is not even that close to tunnels. It's not even that close. I encourage you, if anyone, anyway. So, but it takes time to figure that out. You're there figuring that out. So that's the time that you're doing that. Okay, so 12:05 is when you get on the A train. I have these two folks. I was actually in Germany when this happened, so I didn't know much about it. But this couple was on the A train with their amazing little dog named Poppy. And if you've noticed, people started carrying their dogs on the train more frequently in the past 5 years. There was actually a change in the law that said if your dog is in a container, you can bring it around onto the subway. But these two people were, he was actually arrested and strip searched for bringing this cute dog, Poppy, even though he was just asking sort of why? It's Poppy in a bag. But you take the train, you take the A train. And at 12:27, you're hungry at this point, right? Especially if you've had the kayak. So I recommend Peaches at the Utica stop. It's the same guys who run that smoke joint. It's really, really yummy. There is a dessert on the website, but I recommend you don't do the dessert because you still have like 2 days to go on this escape tour. I'm going to go a little bit quicker, but so from there, you walk on Schenectady. I recommend walking on Schenectady to go to your next location because there are these wonderful gardens along the way. And at this point, you're in Stuyvesant Heights near Bed-Stuy, which is kind of the origin, really, of the whole urban garden movement in the 1970s in New York City. So there's some beautiful moments there. It's already 1:50 by the time you reach Weeksville. And this kind of itinerary, to the extent that it's spatial, it's really sort of gesturing towards potential programs. And in that way, it's very much inspired by the Weeksville Heritage Center, which unfortunately, I don't know who's in the room, but unfortunately they fired some of their best staff to pay for the building that they constructed. I mean, not to pay for the building, obviously, but there was amazing programming that was happening here in the summers with people like Michelle and Diego Cello and Amel LaRue. But what you can do Friday, once you get there, is just kind of appreciate the houses that have been restored lovingly. And it's a kind of location of free blacks of the early 1800s who protected other free blacks in New York City during the draft riots in 1863. That's one of the kind of penultimate moments of this site in history. So you have some time to just chill there, 2:20 before you hop on the J train. You're going east on the J train, and then you take, I think it's the Q4 bus. That was one of the buses in Queens. Before you arrive to Adels Lake Park, which is this amazing. It was, this is Ella Fitzgerald's home. There's this collection of mansions of these great jazz figures from New York City. So you have Fats Waller's house there, Lena Horne had her house there, Ella Fitzgerald's mansion, Duke Ellington. So you wander around here just appreciating these giant homes. Before heading on the LIRR, Babylon, to go to the Oakfield Cemetery, which was another site kind of similar to Weeksville, but there's no heritage center yet around it. There's just this kind of burial ground, which kind of similar to the African burial ground downtown in Manhattan has become a historical site. At 6:30, this is where I suggest a lift, because you're kind of going far. So here you just head up straight north to Port Washington, which is also this amazing site of not just kind of African American history in New York City, but kind of early integration. There's the Sands Point School was integrated as early as 1910, and also they have this amazing oral history website. So I would suggest you kind of charge up your phone in that lift so that when you get there you can listen to some of these. At that point it's evening time. Oh, this is kind of one of those wonderful photographs from the website. So this is the high school that is still standing, but I think it's a different building. At this time it's evening, so you would take an Airbnb and then get up early in the morning and go to the port itself. This is really why you have the kayak that you've been carrying around all day. You kayak across. This is my estimate. I obviously haven't done this, but I estimate it would be just 20 minutes. I mean, if you're strong, I don't know. To get to Pelham Bay Park, at which point you're avoiding Manhattan because you have a kayak strapped to your back. You know, you've kind of done this whole route, but you go down to 125th Street before you head back up. 7:30 in the morning. I'm giving you 9 minutes to buy your ticket at the Amtrak. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong time. No, that is exactly the right time. So you take the 7:39 Amtrak at Yonkers. It's this wonderful ride called the Maple Leaf that goes up to Toronto. So you take the train from, this is the actual Yonkers station, and so now it's Saturday, right? You all got the right, because you started off in the morning, Saturday morning, and at 4:21 p.m. you arrive here. This is actually not the Amtrak, but you'll be taking that kayak to this is the Niagara River. I would suggest you get off there's 2 stops on the Niagara River, one on the US side, one on the Canadian side. I would suggest you get off on the US side with your kayak.
Wow. I think we know what we're doing for the spring program. Who wants to start?
Really nice presentation. That's cool. Entertaining. I guess your project really brings out one of the issues of escape. I guess when you're trying to leave or if you're trying to stay, a lot of the time escape relies somewhat heavily on transportation. And your project really thoroughly brought out how lucky we are here to have such robust public transportation, and even like Lyft and Airbnb or sort of quasi-public transportation infrastructures that really thrive here, which is really nice. And so I really liked that because it kind of is an egalitarian project in that sense, which maybe there's more to that than I'm able to parse out, but that was a really interesting part of this, was that it is such an accessible project. I really appreciate that.
I love it, 100%. But one of the things that's I like enormously as well is that in both tracing this history, through time and having a person, us, start at Wall Street and make it all the way up to the Canadian border with the looking through basically Black history as one is doing that. It's also asking it. I mean, the links to Eric Gardner, and I think one of the things that's been so astonishing about the whole movement is that, not astonishing, I think that's the wrong word, but that it's the awareness of the day-to-day reality for a lot of Black people, that a lot of white people are like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And that is obviously a problem in and of itself, and that what is this incredible history of L. Fitzgerald and the Underground Railroad, that all of this stuff, that's a different type of recognition, or you're asking people to recognize something that is existing and real, and this incredibly rich history that is also not particularly present in day-to-day life for a lot of people who are not Black. And I think it's great. Rather lumpily said, but
Mitch, fantastic. I mean, it's so interesting that part of, I think, part of escape or finding these roots, the sort of lost histories that get buried, that are in our everyday lives that we pass by every day, these addresses, these places that have meaning for people. It's really interesting that these histories are places of resistance that I think we have a lot to sort of learn from, that they become of the moment, they become prescient to us, they're present. So I think that's all I want to say about that.
I guess I had two questions, sort of based a little bit on what you initially said about the whole question of escape being, actually, racial and gendered in different ways, and so, what are people escaping from? What are they escaping to when we talk about leaving the city? Wait.
I was talking more
That
about...
wasn't my question, but,
Okay.
but if you're disagreeing with my characterization, you can do that.
Yeah, because I was just talking more about the difference between escape as a vector of dispersal and escape as a potential intensification. Partially because when I went to do some of the research, I was constantly surprised how much kind of social networking and technology there was in these modes of resistance. And so kind of the ways that, even the phrase underground railroad is it's a reference to a technology, right? And so I was more interested in sort of ways that escape can be part of how the logic of the city embeds itself deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because one of my questions was about transportation. I mean, you have this kind of Baroque use of as many forms of transportation as possible, and I was wondering if there was more meaning inscribed in that, and it sounds like there is.
It's both no and yes. I mean, it's a little. My own life feels like this, because partially I've moved to the Midwest without having a driver's license. And so I'm making these calculations on a kind of day-to-day basis as well. So it's a little bit of a kind of, I think I'm asking for projection to also to be kind of, maybe this is what you're calling the kind of racial and gendered. I think, asking for the self to be projected into other modes of self in some ways with the kind of notion of escape here. But that kind of haphazard use of transportation is very much just me projecting myself into this as well.
Well, my other question was just maybe also based on a slight misinterpretation of what you were saying, but I felt like there was a little bit of a point in this, especially as you sort of took people slowly through neighborhoods, perhaps cross-cutting in ways that many people don't usually go, that you were saying that there's plenty to escape to, there's plenty to learn here in the city. So then I was curious that you ended up...
Oh, I think you may have pressed the button.
Okay. So I was curious that you ended up, at Niagara at the end, and the choice not to keep it within kind of the bounds of New York City and environs, but then to take this longer route.
Well, that's the maple leaf that takes, from 7:29 to 4:21 p.m. So one could obviously just kind of leave that part of the itinerary and then circuit back from Yonkers. But that's very much just making it, kind of driving it home that this is a mining of history, that Canada was the point of, again, this kind of technological and kind of theological conflation, that one finds in this historical moment of Black people, literally needing to escape. That this was the terminus, right? That one escaped to Canada.
And I think that when people think about the Underground Railroad, it's often as much like getting out of the South, but it's not. It's to get to Canada.
Yes.
That was the point. It wasn't to get to Boston. It was to get to Canada. So I think that, that's how I read that.
Yeah, and that's why Ohio became so important.
Yeah.
It was like, if you draw the line north, you go from the South to Canada most quickly through Ohio.
Mitch, how would we draw all the people that have been protesting over the past almost 2 weeks now into the tour?
Yeah, no, I was out there yesterday, and it's funny because the kind of the march, the first part of it was barricaded off because it was permitted, and so there's all the kind of chanting happening in the middle, but then people on the outside from the barricades were critiquing the march, saying, "This is a parade," Which I really appreciated. You have to, as an architect, you have to appreciate critique because it's constant, right? So I would hope that this tour would be a way of kind of creating something that's both permanent and not permanent, programmed and not programmed.
Good. Any remarks from the audience? And I see there's some new people in the back. It may be a little difficult to hear, but we actually still have some bench up here and a chair here, so you're more than welcome to join us up here. Yeah. Any people with thoughts here? Fred always has a lot of thoughts.
I'd like to make the trip.
Yeah.
It's very meaningful.
Thank you, Mitch.
So I think a very different turn after I think Mitch's really powerful examination of what escape could mean. If the early 20th century city is characterized by the blasé, as socialist Georg Simmel argues, the city of the 21st century is soaked in anxiety. Anxiety is the energy that allows us to be the city that never sleeps. It drives us to go to the gym at 6 a.m., to work like animals, to think big, and to accomplish. It is also the energy that allows us to pay exorbitant rent, to force ourselves into habitually enduring a packed subway commute, to sit in our cars for hours each week to get that perfect rent-free parking space, to constantly be vigilant towards abandoned parcels, and to require 3-week advance notice to plan a coffee date. The 21st century city is miraculous and absurd. It is sometimes possible to escape the anxiety of the city by escaping the city itself. Yet even this option, afforded only by those of certain income brackets, is for many impossible. A newly enabled constant connection to work life, sales reports, client inquiries, and boss demands frequently removes the possibility of this escape. Perhaps one answer lies here. Porn light. A body washed in the gentle glow emanating from a small but expansive window onto another world, various worlds. It is a classic among escapes, the pornographic, voyeuristic encounter rooted in a set of universal human conditions: adolescent transgression, exploration, a reasonable dose of shame, and privation. So what does this have to do with the 21st century city? In many ways, the activity is fundamentally anti-spatial, an act that certainly undoes the city or architecture's relevance for a while. Beyond the simple act of providing the privacy itself, architecture is not terribly relevant to porn light. However, porn light constitutes a relatively new form of anti-spatial empowerment, where the viewing of pornography is no longer predicated on an adrenaline-fueled visit to a seedy shop in Midtown, or the awkwardly camouflaged purchase at the drugstore. Rather, the previously required barrier to entry has been eviscerated. The risk of discovery has been mitigated. The shame potential, for the most part, has been removed. In addition to its anti-spatial nature, porn light is fundamentally uncivic, rooted in a solitude that requires the absence of observant others. The gaze is fundamentally one-directional. Porn light jettisons the characters that we hold so dear: public space, civic engagement, active citizenship. I think because of this, and its nature as being one of the most classic of escapes, it might be worth gazing at porn light's features and peculiarities to see if there are answers that it holds for us as urban residents. First off, and most obvious, porn light requires isolation. One must be alone to be selfish. The act of hiding allows oneself the latitude to indulge. Porn light requires transgression, even in a mild form. It requires some level of doing something that one is not supposed to be doing. Porn light is a physical, emotional experience. It is neither intellectual nor contemplative. It is corporeal, combining a sense of excitement with a sense of relaxation. It is not a decision or goal, but an experience. Porn light is easy and accessible. It's not difficult. And perhaps most importantly for us, it channels anxiety, and thereby dwells in it while moving beyond it. It focuses anxiety, combines it with corporeal pleasure, and allows for a temporary escape. And while the activity neither lasts very long, it is an escape that can produce an emotional response that lasts far longer than the activity itself, like the sleepy satisfaction after a day at the beach. Escape from urban anxiety does not need to be epic. It does not need to last for 2 weeks. It can be easy, and most importantly, it should work through anxiety rather than trying to avoid it. And while the barrier to entry in overcoming urban anxiety in non-pornographic means may not be as simple as a Time Warner account, we do have some options. For obvious reasons, and some not so obvious, the direct translation of porn light into the city is impossible. So the task I've set forth here is a failure before it's begun. However, I have compiled a short list of possible escapes that I think border on its logic. So next Sunday, instead of taking your 7:30 a.m. jog through the great recreo-civic spaces of the city, Central Park, Prospect Park. The Hudson River waterfront, Riverside Park, or the East River Esplanade. Take a train to 125th Street. Walk west towards the Hudson. Go south underneath the West Side Highway overpass. Walk up a small hill into the Green Park area beyond. Hop a short fence and begin your jog here. As you run south through the tunnel, you will encounter darkness, interrupted with periodic washes of sunlight entering in through skylights of Riverside Park above. Gratuitous graffiti, trash, and other indices of the potential for the possibly dangerous presence of others. And if you time your jog correctly, you will also feel the rumble and tremble of the ground, coupled with the overpowering echoed cacophony of trains rushing by on the tracks beside you. After a mile or two, you may easily exit and return to the comfort of Riverside Park through a number of reasonably accessible fenced escape hatches. As you emerge, your anxiety will hopefully have reached a tipping point, where the physical engagement, the rush of danger, and the thrill of trespassing and not getting caught will transition into mildly cathartic pleasure, satisfaction, and excitement. Or if running is not your pleasure, sleep in. And as evening moves into the wee hours, hop on your bike, ride downtown to the financial district, and race through the hilly streets where 17th century urban planning has combined with 20th century will to height to create cavernous valley streets devoid of residential occupants or the hustle and bustle of a Monday morning. Traffic lights are reasonably optional at this time. Let the massiveness of your surroundings, your solitude, and the mild danger slip in. Or if exercise is not your thing, take the G train to North Greenpoint and walk along Commerce Street just before dusk. Slip through one of the holes in the fences beyond the parking lots populated by numerous cats. Sit by the Superfund wasteland of Newtown Creek and gaze at the city, silhouetted by the overpowering brightness of waning daylight. Let the image of the massive city, the disgust of the creek, and the danger of trespassing overtake you. Now, I don't mean to foster criminal activity per se, but as New Yorkers, we need to find ways to deal with our anxiety. And in a city whose economic prowess has frequently digested once magical spaces, seemingly inaccessible spaces, into positive but whitewashed bourgeois experiences, passive spectacles of leisure soon to be overwrought with attendance. Perhaps solitary, victimless transgressions offer a powerful potential for escape.
Thank you. Topic hardly discussed in architecture, so I'm happy we're discussing this. Alexandra is still gathering her thoughts.
I'm a little perplexed by this, honestly. Like from the first image, what is that first image that you had up there?
The first image.
Say again in the mic. I think people may have not missed it.
I just said I was a little perplexed and asked him what the first image that he had up there was.
The first image, her name is, I forgot her name. It's from a series of photographs by Gabrielle something, and she took these photographs of bloggers, basically, only lit by their computer. And so the one who was there was a woman named Funky Brown Chick, who is a sex columnist. So she writes a blog about sex from New York.
So, and how are you spelling light?
Light, L-A-G-H-T.
Okay. Yeah, I guess maybe I shouldn't be talking. I guess I'm still perplexed. I mean, I feel like there's something very nostalgic about this because I at least don't perceive porn as a victimless crime. And I feel like that's been a topic that's been debated. So I feel like your description of the spaces in which porn used to be consumed seems slightly nostalgic for a previous New York, and I guess I'm not sure I agree with it as an anxiety reliever. So I'm just having trouble kind of putting myself in the position of wanting to take this escape.
I think for me, I wanted to do something a little bit provocative to think about. And in that sense, by no means have I resolved all the possibilities in this. It's sort of 7 minutes to think about something. I mean, it is a very gendered question, which is also why I put the image up in the beginning of actually a woman looking at pornography, because I figured this is something that, at least from our take, is not the standard image of the way that that's viewed. And you're right, it is, I think, also a sort of nostalgia in some ways of a different city. When I was thinking about the places, I was thinking about, the Warriors, 1970s New York, or the empty financial district in the evening of the 80s, which is now actually much more residential. So there are ways that I was thinking about the danger of some of these things in a different way.
But
in a nostalgic way.
also, but I don't think writing a sex column is the same thing as looking at porn.
I mean, I don't think I'm equating them. I was more interested in the image of what that looks like than necessarily what she's doing per se. And there are definite slips here that I don't think are necessarily completely logical or.
Okay, yeah, I find that problematic.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I was thinking of I was thinking of sex. I wasn't thinking about pornography per se, whatever that is. Your first image of the blogger was about, I want to break into like something about the city, like a little BB kid, the thrill is gone kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is nostalgic in a way because you're talking about a certain, that walking that edge.
Hit the button.
Hello. Sorry. But walking that edge of danger and yeah, I can see it, the tunnel and that sort of 70s New York, and so come back. But just sort of a desire to have that thrill, because I was thinking, okay, so maybe what you're talking about is sort of, in a way, sort of thrill seeking, right? About thrill seeking and how. I'm going to try again. Thrill seeking and how these escape routes or tours or exercises or exercising can become these things of where you're trying to capture that feeling, right? That's related around, you're relating it to sex, right? It's like there's the thrill, there's the copulation, there's the there's the relief,
right?
There's the understanding of being taken to another place and escaping whatever it is.
I mean, I think I wanted to look a little bit at the solitary aspect of that, as opposed to the sort of vulnerability of being with someone. So that's sort of why I focused more on the idea of looking at it.
I guess I had some of the same questions that these guys are having in a conflation of the reflected light of the computer screen and the solitary nature of watching porn on your laptop.
This is a corded mic.
A bit of a conflation between that reflected light and then also the sort of bosky light of the dappled light of being in that tunnel, or the dawn and the dusk that you're proposing. So those are the isolation of these two very different types of light and the isolation of the person participating. But other than that, other than breaking through fences and like jumping over barriers that you're not supposed to be, and maybe porn is not, maybe that's also still a little bit taboo enough that, that's an equivalent of jumping over a fence. But I wasn't able to make that connection myself, other than the clarity of the reflected light and the taboo, but the act of the run and the act of watching porn, I couldn't quite make that connection.
Yeah, it seems like maybe you tried to spatialize the act of porn by using light, and everybody's getting distracted by that. But I think the actual porn as a formal thing is actually it's a good analogy, because there's you're sort of by just doing that rather than going out and participating in this enormous spectacle of trying to participate in this really choreographed, whitewashed chase for the real thing. In some ways, maybe looking at porn is super resistant in that sense, And so maybe there is a really good analogy to finding spaces that are just, and I'm saying formally. I'm not trying to justify the whole network of of porn, but formally. Formally is an act of like a solitary act of, you know. But I think it could be, you know, that as like you know, something that then translates kind of nicely into your like Dada-esque or Fluxus kind of instructions for dropping out of the city in some ways, which I think that analogy of porn is actually kind of useful, of like you're dropping out of this like commercial sphere and into another commercial sphere, but maybe there's still something to learn from that formal act.
That's pretty profitable.
Yeah. Okay, not commercial, but you are dropping out of the commercial aspect, some of the commercial aspects of the city, which almost is entirely geared toward like selling you things to make you think you're gonna have sex, like alcohol and clothes and stuff.
Right behind you.
As I'm sure many people in this room know.
Can you say what?
Ann Snittow from the New School. As I'm sure many people in this room know, feminists deeply disagree about pornography, and I'm on the other side about this. I look at this picture and I think this is the ultimate victimless crime, and the possibility of being alone in the city is one of the big issues. And I thought that what you were doing was a metaphor for various possibilities of that, the tunnels being famously another place where whole separate groups who are not known to others live. And there's the question of secrecy, privacy, aloneness, and pornography is just one of, but I think a very interesting one of the possible metaphors for that. And I like that very much. And just in a larger sense, I guess I agree with you that, you know, that once you start talking not just about pornography but sex in the city, you know, there's so many possible ways of talking about it and seeing it as one of the layers of it. You know, it's a very erotic place, the city, or can be, and I thought you were trying to edge in on that.
Let's see if we're going to tie all of ourselves up here in this court. I thought it was interesting too, and one of the things I've been struggling with as a European, to me it's still incomprehensible how sex is completely devoid or void in the landscape here. Where I'm from in Holland, sex is so visible in the cities. Think of Northern European cities like Berlin and all of that. So I am also nostalgic, I guess, for a time that I never experienced in New York. But I think it was probably very interesting in many ways. And I wonder if there would be anything that you would want to say on that, because sex is still, obviously, still part of the city, but it's either taking place behind closed doors or it's pushed to the edges of the city. There's tons of parking lots along the highways that are still heavily being used for car cruising. All the prostitution, which I'm also not a fan of, but that was in Times Square, is now sitting along the highways in Brooklyn, for instance. So it's still all there, but we're trying to pretend it's not there. And I have a feeling that you were trying to say something about that too without saying it. Is that right?
I mean, yes and no. I think I'm more, as one of the respondents had a comment, looking at this as a metaphor for the possibility of being alone, getting out of the kind of intellectual, sort of nervous thought type space that I often find myself in the city. And thinking about ways to actually engage physically and alone in the city. So I think in that sense, I'm definitely trying to use this more as a metaphor than comment on the sexual politics of an industry in the city.
Ooh, sorry.
I'm just wondering, how is the High Line playing into this? Because I presume it wasn't the cliche about exhibitionism at the Standard Hotel. Right?
No, I mean, in terms of, in the same way that I said that there's sort of an easiness to this, right? If you take your run from down Hudson and just move it into this tunnel, you're going to have this other experience. And I think in that sense, I'm sort of comparing back to, the High Line as a space that you could never get to, except for Joel Sternfeld at that one time, where they got him up there, and a few people in the 80s would, get in there and take photographs and be in this, this place that you could look at but never quite reach. And then I sort of see the landscape project that, while amazing, and it's an amazing space, it's now become this sort of digested, very populous place where alone is not something that's going to happen there. And so in that sense, I'm sort of harking back to the idea of a wonderful space like the Highline before this where you could be alone, which requires some sort of transgression.
How do you feel about that when sort of spaces like maybe some you've identified then become the opportunities for the city to kind of take over?
Well,
that
I mean,
people that become kind of like
right.
the High Line or something, like the area under the tunnel, they then present themselves as some kind of opportunity that you kind of highlighted. Is that's projecting beyond? Is that that's not your intention?
The opportunity being sort of codified into like the High Line?
Yeah.
I mean, on a certain level, I think those things are inevitable and good, right? Because that gives a very democratic access to a hugely amazing space. But I think at the same time, it does a little bit of trouble because you're and again, forced into these sort of like civic, digestible, bourgeois experiences. And so I sort of feel that one way to deal with that could be, us as New Yorkers going on and trying to find all these other places. I mean, specifically in the sense that I'm looking at, pornography's accessibility as being something new to some degree. When I was researching this, you can go online and people will show you a YouTube video of how to get into the Freedom Tunnel, that place is called. Or there's a way that there's a whole network, a space of finding these kind of spaces. And I think in that sense, I find that exciting. Whereas I think the High Line is great and fantastic, but also, there's a loss there. It's a give and take.
I wonder also if there's a sort of hidden in plain sight aspect to some of this. And as you're saying that, there's a tunnel and as Mitch was talking about, these sort of social networks that are also embedded in whether, in the metaphor of transportation, a separate conversation, but I think that all of the titty bars are now at the edge of the BQE now because a lot of truckers, and it's just that's when Giuliani changed the zoning and pushed it to Times Square. Guess what? Sunset Park. Hello.
Yeah.
And they're still there, and they're just in different places. And I think that I live in a neighborhood. I'm obviously quite naive because it was years before somebody was like, "Oh yeah, that's a hooker stroll around the corner from your house." I was like, "Oh, those nice ladies." I just didn't know. I mean, so I think that there is, and when you're talking about maybe I'm mixing up a bunch of stuff now, but the sort of sanitization of something like the High Line and the formalization of it as the space that it is now, it's that was an edge of Manhattan, then Manhattan has pushed itself back out again, and now what used to happen under the High Line and at the edges in that neighborhood are now it's Brooklyn and Queens, and it's displacement as much as actual sanitization.
I think it's displacement, but there's also a great deal of integration. Like you were saying, you didn't know this was happening, right? Because I think in terms of the same things that allow us to look at pornography so much easier, if you look at things like Tinder or Grindr, I mean, there's things happening right in your very building, of people having these sort of illicit encounters in a very whitewashed way that's completely acceptable. And there's a way that we've been empowered to let that happen in all sorts of spaces. So it's almost as if, once you're at the point where you can have a smartphone, that level of seediness of what was Times Square isn't really necessary anymore.
There's one comment from the audience, and then we should move to the next.
Great.
And I think what probably, for me at least, is more compelling than the sexual sanitation issue is you're suggesting sort of a physical expression or a pushing. Like you're often talking about sort of climbing through things or climbing over things. And that sort of physical transgression and engagement is not really available in a lot of these sort of more frequented spots. And I think that is really exciting, that sort of erotic activity.
Good, we're going to jump over to Gia. Thank you very much.
All right. There's a couple of premises to this. Architentions has been, involved in an ongoing research about urban fabric and social behaviors, and then, a little bit falls into the idea of escape. And one important thing that I think, I thank the Van Alen for this talk, and we understand how important they are. I think it goes a little bit into Mitch's presentation and also Peter, that I had a complete different interpretation of what you were saying, more as a metaphor instead of you know, the whole aspect of sex. It's the fact that the public realm, usually and historically, you know, for the cities, it's the domain of the architect. And right now we are actually witnessing a shift towards all these figures, city executives and developers, which they tend to have more control on land values and on activities that we do in our cities. And I think it is important that you know, this talk that we are making here, they sort of refer to, you know, notional livability, innovation, what we call smart cities, for example. And I think it's time that we shift that authority to architects. And I think what Peter was trying to say, showing all those nostalgic sort of images, it taps a little bit into that, into shifting towards the architect and the designers, the idea of, you know, the notion of our contemporary city and the development of urban fabric. And, you know, as citing Thoreau, in the wildness is the preservation of the world. Our presentation is more, we use emotional path, especially via water. We believe that our idea of routes of escape stems from the fact that escape is an experience that involves space and time, whether for an extended or compressed duration. The experience becomes the fifth dimension of a four-dimensional space-time coordinate system within the urban fabric. And we identified that the most common routes of escape currently in the city are usually within the city itself, within neighborhood, and sometimes within blocks. And the high density of institution, parks, and commercial activity in New York brings us to experience our escape within the grid boundaries, with their rhizomatic connections and heterogeneity, to cite Deleuze and Guattari. Or sometimes embarking on more of a time-consuming and a physical effort trip. We go upstate to the Catskill, for example, embarking on a 3-4 hour trip as we move down towards the water in the Hamptons, embarking into a driving journey or a train journey. And what we try to analyze here is how we can escape within the city using a different means of transportation and a different type of infrastructure.
So we're back to Mitch's canoe.
Correct. And in fact, you know, one of the incredible resources for New York is hydrology. Hydrology as infrastructure. We have identified different type of locations through the water, the Upper East River, the Hudson River, the Lower East River, New York Upper Bay, Jamaica Bay, and the Lower Bay, New York area, where the Rockaways are located. Another element of our journey is the edge. The edge of the city is the water, but the edge of the city is the immense resource of greenery around the city, the metropolitan area. As you see in this map, the New York metropolitan areas is a constellation of small or larger green areas. And in fact, our presentation is, you know, it highlights more some of these routes of escape that are already possible. In fact, you know, as a premises of this research, we have been experiencing and testing these new itineraries throughout the summer via ferry and via bike. Some of them are part of a future scenario that could be proposed to city executive, and this is, you know, I go back to my premises at the beginning on the fact that architects should be the main actors on city planning. And so, well, just I go back a little bit here. The edge of the city, the water and the green, it is a special physical and temporal condition. It's the condition of what I call in-between. And here, as I go, at the beginning of our idea, escape as an experience that involves space and time, not always we identify spaces, but also there is time as a duration as a hierarchy, time as a sort of a hierarchical component of our escape. And some of our escape are more condensed, some of them are more expanded. And so we identified acceleration, collapse, and simultaneity. Simultaneity occurs basically, is a condition where is the most complex route of escape. It's where there are many overlapping of situations. History, green, it's possible to experience the path via bike, via ferry, or walking. And it usually occurs when the urban fabric is more stratified, like in the upper New York Bay area, where we have the presence of Gardner Island, Staten Island, and Liberty Island. And then we have acceleration. It's the middle section of the East River Corridor, which accelerates the connection between Brooklyn, Long Island City, Queens, and Manhattan through an important island, and it's becoming even more important now, Roosevelt Island, with the new expansion of Cornell Tech campus, and Fort Freedom Park, and so forth. And then we have the collapse. The collapse is the upper section of the East River, which is populated with an interesting archipelago of small islands, which abandoned for a very long time. They are now the natural habitat of a lush vegetation and also rare birds. Birds are nesting there, like cormorants, egrets, gulls, and herons. And in particular, there are two little islands, North Brother Island and South Brother Island, which the city is actually considering repurpose it as a natural reserves. And so here are our path. Basically, we literally stitched the coastline through via ferry, identifying also sort of a thematic route of escape. Educational science, nature reserves, art and leisure, and so forth. And some of the things are still happening. I was I'm very pleased to see that in Mitch's presentation, we are trying to encourage people to go at the boundary, at the edge of our city. We have an incredible resource of history, nature, and culture, a lot of culture. And so we broke it down into possible routes that can be experienced in a different way. This is more about simultaneity. We have a lot of art, leisure, and history at the same time. There is Gardner Island with their summer art activities, but also music, and this route of escape can be experienced through via bike, via ferry as a method of transportation, and also walking. And then we have the midsection of the East River, which it is often used as a route of kayaking. And it's a very beautiful experience now that you can sort of cross from Brooklyn or Queens via ferry. It doesn't require a lot of struggle with transportation. It's very, very short. We did it many times. We tried to go also for a meeting. Our office is based in Brooklyn, and we just crossed to Midtown via ferry. And it was a very beautiful experience. The idea here is that the inhabitants of the city interact with the main variables, space and times, in their own local frame. Using an analogy with physics, these conditions of the time and the perception produces a hyperspace where the main space-time phenomena are the collapse, acceleration, and simultaneity. And the last part is the upper East River corridor, which is really becoming a place where there is a lot of nature to be experienced. And so we identified two possible paths. With a very small investment, it's possible to repurpose actually the boardwalk on North Brother Island, and it's possible to actually visit the island walking or via bike, versus South Brother Island, which became a sort of a nesting location for rare birds. And we are proposing basically to visit the island via boat, via a small boat that can be taken from North Brother Island, and it can be sort of the point of the beginning of the journey in this more nature path. And then, as a closing slide, it's basically the effect of this journey. The effect of the journey, we call it the psychology of the in-between, urbanism and human behavior. That is ultimately what our office focuses on and embark on every time that we also start a new project, no matter of the scale. It could be a small-scale residential or a large urban planning. And I think it is very important to see that it's possible to save us a lot of time and also transportation effort to use the current transportation system, which could be the subway sometimes, but we encourage people to take the ferry, and we would love for the city to implement the ferry system, which will give you a very peculiar situation. It's a physical situation which will let you experience the sky without the boundaries of the city grid.
Very good.
Just quickly, a lot of this is also predicated on the destination, and I'm not sure, is South Brother actually, are they really both open? I don't think they are.
Not yet.
No,
not
no.
yet.
And I'm not sure they will. I think it would be more than a boardwalk, but I mean, that's a separate issue. But I think that so much of what you're talking about is based on destination. And one thing about the ferries that's always struck me, and I've taken the East River Ferry a few times, never at commuting hours, but what's always struck me about it is, I'm trying to get home, and the rest of the ferry is couples, families, people having picnics. Like, it seems as if nobody's going anywhere. They're just on the boat, and they're having a great time. And it's a cheap date. And I think that the Staten Island ferry is, even Time Out magazine will say, it's the cheapest tourist thing you can do. Just go back and forth. On a beautiful day, it's the cheapest, nicest thing you can do. And there's something about the act of just being out there as opposed to trying, probably some of those folks don't even get off of Staten Island. So the destination may not matter.
I was going to say it's the opposite of that. Which is that
As you should.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe in this case the ferry doesn't matter, because it seems like you've done a really interesting thing, which is mapped out all of these auxiliary spaces that are really far away that I couldn't even really comprehend all of them, and it was really cool to see them all on a map. And so maybe alone that, I've been to a few of them.
When you say far away, you mean far away from each other?
Far away, kind of.
Like all over the city.
But also just far away outside of what we normally think of as like our sort of mental geography.
Everything but Red Hook.
Jersey.
Oh wait, which one's in New Jersey?
New Jersey is just that part that is green on the art leisure.
I see.
Yeah.
Because every single thing, with the notable exception of Red Hook, is accessible by standard public transportation. Well, actually, Red Hook, if you take a bus, is accessible by public transportation. And North Brother, of course, you
Well, I answer a little bit to both. I think you know what happened is that, like, you're right. If you take the ferry, you will encounter all these people that you don't exactly know what they're doing, and where they are going, but they are definitely having fun, and that is what happened to us. One day we decided to cross with the ferry. It was on a random day, and we were struck from the fact that we were so much fun. It was a physical condition, was completely different from the regular transportation. It was incredibly fast. So we said, okay, maybe we stay on the boat for a while now because this is too fast. And we were experiencing this different condition within, you know, the city. And I was struck from the fact that I was looking at New York City, but I was on a boat, there was the water, and there was a means of nature. It was very, very interesting. And yeah, on the other hand, yes, we tried to map sort of points of departure and points of destination, which was the original title of the research. And mostly, most of this route can be already experienced. I found myself, and sometimes also talking to friends, very reluctant to go to the outskirts of our city, but it's incredible, it's really beautiful, and we embarked on this research this summer. We went biking and visiting amazing places, and really also culturally it's very, very enriching, because you go through different places with different, and I want to say immigrants' heritage, and the roots of their people and their history, it's so strong that you can come back feeling, I've visited many places. So I'm still in New York, but I've visited many places. And I think, you know, that's an invitation to embark on this.
So you know that usually I like it quiet and calm, but I have the feeling this would possibly benefit of a little spice and speed. And I wonder what we could plug into to this to get it. I wonder if it's a fast ferry or if there's something.
Sorry.
Kayaks.
Kayaks. Kayaks, water.
I'm too lazy for that. What would you plug in to give it that extra flavor to? Jet skis. There we go.
Yeah, we thought about like possibly integrating different types of sports, like water sports, for example. But also, and that's a part of what we experienced this summer, the different type of food that you can experience throughout different these different locations.
It's really interesting that we hardly ever, I'll say we hardly ever refer to New York as this coastal city. It almost feels funny to say, like, I mean, of course after Sandy we realize we're a coastal city, but it's like we're only just learning to how to find the water again, you know, like that we don't experience these different habitats and places that are within the city limits, within the different boroughs. It's interesting, I think of the first time my brother lives over in New Jersey in like near Atlantic Highlands, and he takes the ferry into 34th Street. The first time I took the ride with him, it was like, wow, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like, look at that. Oh, hey, look, I'm going out to Verrazano. Oh, hey, we're in the harbor. Look at, whoa, what are all these tankers going by? Where do they come from? You know, like you just don't even, you know, look, they're going over to New Jersey to dock. You just have no idea, really. I mean, and it's interesting if you're setting up something that then takes people not just to these sort of cultural destinations, but there's sort of an oppositional to it. It's that there are these sort of natural, the simultaneity I think you're talking about. There's these natural preserves, these other places that are untouched in a way that you say, this also exists in the city, and how can people experience them? Now, of course, when you bring people to these places to experience them, you risk destroying them. But it's, you know, North Brother and South Brother Island exist sort of in a way. They're just sort of become these, you know, they're natural preserves. And untouched. It's almost enough just to kind of go by them and see that these places exist in the city, without sort of stepping foot on them. Even I think of the ones, there's another one area just over on the north shore of Staten Island. And then also in the lower bay, there's a couple of little islands that used to be inhabited that no longer are.
One of the interesting things too about, especially North Brother, the times I've been on a boat and gone by them, it's incredible because you have these ruins and this incredible sort of enveloping nature, and then if you let your eye focus just a little bit beyond, you're like, oh look, there's the prison barge, So it's this like constant juxtaposition between that nature and the fact that depending on where you're looking, there is this sort of other sort of forgotten, invisible New York that is just right smack there too. So I think that awareness could be expanded beyond just the natural world.
I think we're going to jump over. I see Sarah looking at me like, oh, we're at time. Right. I think Gia is up next. Alessandro, thank you very much.
To first thank Van Alen, and I feel like this escape idea has been, the last couple of weeks I've been sort of away thinking about it, and the last couple of projects I feel like I just escaped as well. So if I sound a little bit jet lagged during this presentation, I do kind of feel like I'm in a daydream, which is what my project is titled. I also wanted to give a special thank you to John Hartman, who's in the back, who was really helpful with the discussions and the kind of thesis of this proposal. And Ashley Simone, who's not here, but she photographed all of the images that we're about to see.
Nice.
There's no way to make it a little darker.
We can.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, can you make it darker?
Perfect. Okay.
Very dark.
So in a city of 8.4 million people and 305 square miles, the backbone that supports it is often those who are not seen. New York City has the largest and most diverse population of immigrant workers in the United States, most of whom work in professions that don't always highlight them as individuals. However, collectively, they are the oil that makes the city run. This proposal is the escape of immigrant workers whose livelihood is found in their hands. While there are many different immigrants working in various professions in the city, among the top 25 immigrant occupations, we see Chinese, Hispanic, Caribbean, and Russian, to name a few, who work as contractors, seamstresses, cooks, caregivers, and manufacturers, professions that use their hands as a part of a production of something. By looking towards the tool they use most, their hands become the site for their escape and a mechanism for a fantasy. Workers can take a micro escape at any point in the day for any length of time by glancing at one's hands. While hammering a nail, while chopping onions, while threading a needle, while walking on the subway, while overlaying elsewhere with here. This escape is a surreal object that becomes a real fantasy. A fantasy that is entangled in the idea that their hands are simultaneously the vessel out and the rock that keeps them here. They fall into their fantasy of places they will soon get to, of places they may never get to, of places where they were once from, and the cultural reminders that they carry with them. They see new realities juxtaposed with old ones, worlds within worlds, invented places through proximity and ambiguity. Their hands repeat daily actions, but their minds create new itineraries, with new destinations and new memories. The return back is as quick as the escape out. But they are comforted and reinvigorated in the knowledge that the next trip is right at their fingertips. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to be. I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering if this is a little bit like Exodus or something. It's like the voluntary prisoners of. Would these serve as? What do you think these would serve as a reminder of like where they could be when they're sewing or like doing something?
They are both kind of an object of fantasy, so they're supposed to be both something that takes them to some other place, but also something that might comfort them. So there's some models over there, but you might be able to see that there's a little combination of like invention in it, but also kind of iconic objects. So it's a sort of mixture of it all.
I like the idea of a miniature escape, because a miniature is kind of an escape when you talk about like it kind of compresses an entire idea into a tiny little space where you can take it wherever you want without actually having to escape. So that's really nice.
In my mind too, the escape or the objects are not really real. They're a fantasy. And it's literally by looking at your hands, by the tool that they use the most, that it's both the thing that grounds them, but the thing that can take them away too. So it both brings them here, it's what they're doing, but it's also something that allows them to leave. So they are objects, but they're not real. That's sort of the thought.
I guess the thing that I thought of when you were showing the pictures really was nail art, and how I always look at the cashiers who are working the cash registers with the most extraordinary long nails, and I can't have anything on my nails. It makes me feel claustrophobic. So I have this. I mean, that's sort of a fantasy to me to have that on your fingers. You know, as I think that their jewelry, their fashion, it's self-expression when you're wearing a uniform. And so I almost want to see these and the iconic scenes translated into, nail art transfers. I mean, it's a streamlining of your idea. Maybe you like the kind of fiddly, I don't know, like tourist figurine aspect of it. But I feel like, in a way, if you want to project this forward into something that might be more operational, the idea of having these landscapes of escape at your fingertips would be even stronger, potentially, like as these kind of nail art fantasies.
To build on that, so many of us would love to get our nails done, but I would actually love to see what happens if I'm working with my hands only to type, and I'm sitting in meetings basically all of my days. But there's many things that I would love to be doing with my hands at the same time, and I wonder if there could be a whole separate series of this on for all the folks that are many of the jobs that we occupy here in the room, and what would we be able to do with our hands? I think that could be a whole other very beautiful series.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's interesting to me, and I'm trying to get my head around still very much, is that so much, just as David's saying, a lot of us no longer do, or I certainly don't work with my hands anymore, and manual labor is typically understood as a lower level of labor, if you're not talking about the sort of more valued artisanal approach or types of it, but that you have identified the sort of hands and as the sort of focus of manual labor as actually the possibility and the site of escape, when in fact also that manual labor it can be so defining of people's lives, like that you are doing that 10, 12 hours a day. And that what I'm trying to think about, and I think there's something really interesting there, is that that flipping that around, that it's both the escape, but it's a trap as well. So, but I have not yet gotten there.
I think that's a right mentality. I mean, I was thinking about that as well. It's both a way, there is a catch-22 about it, because it is both an escape, but their hands are also, and maybe this is a little bit what you were saying too, that it's the thing that's keeping them here or keeping them grounded.
And it's work that a lot of people who have options will not do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because that escape can be just sort of the smallest, sort of most delicate thing, because even though you're sort of talking about the hands, it's about the mental diversion of, projecting where you might go or what your dreams are, as you're sort of saying, but also to the point, I guess, of that you're captured in a way, right? You're caught in this place, but your dreams are what you have, So there are always these things that are reminders. I mean, the form they take is, could be anything. I've chosen that, but I think it's a great idea.
I know that everybody wants to try these on, but any questions? Good. One thing I've forgotten to say is that we also have a lot of still beer in the meeting room. So if you feel like looking at the last presentation with a beer, feel free to grab one. But I think we should give Gia a round of applause for a very beautiful proposal.
This is a very simple visualization of some 311 data from the beginning, from when that data was made publicly available. And there are complaints to 311 between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. when, by all measure, we should all be in bed. And they describe a city that is, in a way, kind of pulsating, of course, because no one can get to sleep. And you probably all know that the most common complaint to 311 is actually about noise. And so that was a sort of obvious way to go, but it also sort of was interesting to think a little bit about what that image of the city was actually sort of indexing, which was this glow. So you may know that the 250,000 sodium streetlights in New York City are under, there's a program now to replace them with LED. Which tend to be significantly more efficient and also give off a cleaner, more illuminating light. So this is it's a $76.5 million project that will replace the lights in sort of 80,000 tranches, tranches of 80,000, which will project it to kind of save the city about $14 million a year in maintenance and energy. That light, in addition to the kind of light that comes from our screens, is primarily blue. It's bluish in tone. Blue LED is actually dramatically more efficient than other forms of lighting. So much so that the blue LED are actually used for all manner of other kinds of purposes like data storage and high-speed data transmission. They're also used in smartphones and water purification. It's such a significant advance that the inventors of blue LED are actually the recipient of this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. The other kind of interesting thing about blue LED is that dark adapted eyes, or kind of nighttime eyes in the evening, are more sensitive to shorter wavelengths of light, the blue spectrum. Than daytime sort of adapted eyes. And so therefore, all things being equal, the same amount of light will appear to be brighter to the dark adapted eye. The same amount of blue light will appear to be brighter to the dark adapted eye. So this is the spectrum that we're talking about. It's the blue spectrum, 350 to 530 nanometers in frequency. So this light is sort of really interesting, but it's also maybe not without some controversy. So in 2012, the American Medical Association's House of Delegates enacted a kind of policy paper that found evidence that nighttime electronic light can disrupt circadian rhythms. And you may know something about this. It sort of documented somewhat rapidly advancing understanding that how that disruption affects a number of other aspects of physiological health, from sort of stem cell cycle regulation to DNA damage response, and also metabolism. And the AMA report cites a kind of body of emerging evidence that suggests strong linkages also between circadian disruption and melatonin suppression, and then a kind of corresponding kind of correlation between the suppression of melatonin and various carcinogenic effects, notably breast cancer. Or kind of particularly breast cancer. There are a number of other kind of health concerns that are correlated to melatonin suppression, including kind of factors that contribute to obesity, to diabetes, to depression, to mood disorders, and reproductive disorders. And so this is the kind of controversial spectrum. It's 430 to 510 nanometers in frequency. Don't worry, you're all fine unless you're going to go to bed within about 3 hours. And so it's not just the source of light, but it's also sort of the attendant illumination in the atmosphere that is significant. So this is a kind of chart that correlates a number of different light technologies, ranging from kind of low pressure sodium to 5100 Kelvin LED, which is the light color that most cool lighting is falling within. And you can see that kind of notably factors that contribute to sky glow. If you compare to low sodium, blue rich white light from LED is 7.9 times the kind of nighttime kind of ambient sort of atmospheric illumination compared to some other sources of light. So we were kind of we were sort of really fascinated by that condition, and also sort of a burgeoning citizen science movement that exists, via a number of different kinds of apps, where individuals can go out and sort of contribute to a kind of collective body of information that's being gathered concerning the presence or kind of absence of light pollution in certain locations, and then can report that data back to kind of servers that other people can download that data from. And that's kind of like where a lot of the information that we've been looking at in the office is sort of coming from, and that relates in a way to kind of like an ongoing fascination that I have with the kind of electromagnetic environment of the city. This is kind of a kind of recently publicly available image. It's image from the Swami satellite, a kind of polar orbiting satellite, which was recently made publicly available. What's nice about it is that it's correlated to the standard projection systems for GIS, and so it's kind of correlatable with other information. And so one of the things that we were looking at was these other maps that look at what's called the Bortle scale, which is like a numerical nine number value that looks at the relationship of various lighting sources to kind of nighttime illumination. So basically, it's a kind of it's a measure of the sky, of the night sky's brightness at a particular location, and it kind of quantifies the astronomical observability of certain kinds of celestial bodies against the interference that comes from different kinds of artificial light. And so you can see the two kind of correlated together. So of course, naturally, we're interested in that dark spot up there. So that's kind of the nature of the escape. And I would just kind of note that so this kind of controversy around blue-rich light sources. So from an instrumentation standpoint, the blue-rich light sources are something like 15 to 20%. Like they produce 15 to 20% more sky glow compared to other sources like high-pressure sodium But due to the human eye's increased sensitivity to blue light at lower levels, at lower light levels, the visual brightness that one perceives of blue light is something like 15 times the visual brightness as compared to kind of other comparable amounts of light from other kinds of light sources. So you know, we were looking at maybe kind of like one possible escape was there are a number of municipalities all over New York State that have enacted nighttime light shielding or light pollution legislation. And there's actually a kind of statewide law that's been passed by the legislature, both House and Senate, or Assembly and Senate, on a fairly kind of perennial basis. It's never been signed into law by the governor, but it's out there. But actually, this notion that the glow is somehow both interfering with our bodily systems and also interfering with our ability to experience the sky at night became the sort of organizing feature for the proposed escape. So, so these are 3 sites. They're all within a day's travel. They're all kind of located within particularly dark zones of New York State. And so I'll just kind of go through them really quickly. The first is the Custer Observatory. It's spelled cluster, but it's really Custer, apologies, which is located in South Hold in the North Fork. It's actually Long Island's oldest observatory. It was established in 1927. And within the metropolitan region is actually one of the very darkest places that one can go to. It has a Bortle index score of 4.5, which basically means that there is, as you can see, there are very bright stars that are visible from above, but sort of some interference close to the horizon. A little bit further afield is the Wakely Mountain Fire Observatory, which is actually a really incredible spot. It's not a spot that's traditionally known. It's really known for for astronomy purposes. It's actually a historic fire observation tower. It's located in Wakely Mountain at Lake Pleasant in Hamilton County, right on the edge of the Adirondack Park. And this station includes this 70-foot tall steel frame lookout tower, which was erected in 1916. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and also a kind of 3-mile long hiking trail that leads you down from the mountain. The tower is actually a prefab structure, very early prefab structure. It was built in 1916, and it's one of 10 towers that were purchased by the state to provide as a front line of defense against, to protect the Adirondack Forest Preserve from the hazards of forest fire. And the last, it's a little bit further afield, but really charming, is the Adirondack Public Observatory, which has this kind of lovely public programming and a kind of mission to produce educational experiences related to science and technology and astronomy, the kind of history of astronomy. It's set on the dark side of a hillside adjacent to the Little Wolff Beach and Campground. Easily, very, very accessible, and has 4 mounted telescopes, including a really beautifully restored telescope from 1925 called the Old Town Pump Telescope. And a number of other smaller telescopes and kind of astronomy accessories and equipment for astrophotography. So that is the escape, which maybe is a kind of way for us to both sort of find some peace and quiet and also maybe a good night's sleep.
Wow.
Light.
I really like that your presentation kind of loops back to the beginning. I mean, I think we're talking again about atmospheric effects and maybe different kinds of geologies, because the light pollution is in the air, is something, but it's a man-made creation, and then you have to find these pockets without it, and I think that's a really intriguing idea. And also, I think obviously the idea of darkness as escape flips the whole, beach vacation, like seeking different kinds of light, seeking, flat sunlight on its head in an interesting way. It's like, what do we really need from our vacation? I mean, as the parent of small children, I actually do think I need sleep, so this is much more appealing than a lot of other options.
Yeah, it sounds like a really well thought out series of places to go. And have you thought at all about how to get there?
Yeah, I mean, so the Custer Observatory is like 3 hours from Penn Station by train or by car. Wakely Mountain and the Adirondack Preserve are more like 6 hours and sort of 8 hours or 7.5 hours by car. Unfortunately, but we did want to find one place that was available or kind of accessible by public transportation. But the other places are actually they're really extraordinary. Like Wakely Mountain is kind of arguably the darkest place in New York State, which is really, really interesting. It's like right in the center of that kind of blue, that black dot, so it's like a border score too, which is really low. But yeah, I mean, like those are places that one has to drive. One has to drive to.
I love it. It's a fantastic project, and it's striking to me because just this past week, it must have been a day with very low humidity, or I'm not sure what it was, but coming home from work from Van Alen, and just glancing up at as I got out of the subway. And instead of the 3 stars that I could usually see, like 15.
Right.
I was like, oh my God. And it felt sort of magical and special. And there is something, darkness is not something that we have here. And it takes seeing some darkness to actually remember that. It's the sort of ever-present sort of ambient glow that we all live in here. There's something quite transporting about being in a dark place.
I mean, there are these, I don't think that I've ever seen the Milky Way, personally. I don't know how many people.
We need to work on that.
Well, I know, actually, like, and this is totally an aside, but some of us know each other, and so we were talking about this event, and it was like, they asked the wrong people, like, none of us get out. Like, I don't know anything.
That's the problem with architects.
No, but I think there are also these places. There's this rich community online, of course, where you can find these dark places, and usually it's like you got to drive this way, you have to hop a fence. The parking lot over here, you might be able to see something. So there was this idea that like somehow I know, I'm sorry, I've missed your.
I had no point.
Okay, cool. But I think just like that ability, right, of sort of like the idea that you could see something in the sky that you've never seen before, although it has been there for all that time. But people on these in these websites, right, where they sort of say like, oh, you can take your children, or you can go yourself to go, and you can actually see the Milky Way. Like people report back that there's like they make phone calls because there's something wrong in the sky, right? Like they've seen this figure that is somehow incorrect compared to their experiences. I knew I was going to bring it around. So that just like there's this whole other kind of thing that's up there that people have never actually seen before.
Can I just say I love the idea of darkness message boards. I mean, that almost seems like another kind of activity that could be mapped, like a reverse mapping. Like, where is everybody recommending, or like where have you found the darkness?
Well, so there are these. I mean, I would be happy to share some websites with you. Because it's now like all of those sites are geolocated. They're all you can download a layer for Google Earth that kind of will lead you to all kinds of dark spots, and so
Not metaphorically.
No, there's no metaphor. Like quite literal, really. But there are tons and tons and tons. And then there's also kind of the other kind of dimension of this, of course, has to do with anxiety around biomedical issues. And so, I mean, because we're all aware that our environment is horribly detrimental to us, although we're kind of somehow powerless or willless, or without will, to kind of make modifications to our environment. Like I was doing all this research, like on my phone, right? So being like, this is terrible. I'll never get to sleep. Right, but there's this other kind of. I have a warm spot in my heart for this, like these kinds of communities, and I actually really love the sort of tinfoil hat crowd. Like, we did this whole other project about cell phones, and so I mean that's a whole other kind of area where there are a lot of people who are really, really, really convinced that their cell phones are giving them brain warts, or and the kind of the proximity to the infrastructure of mobile connection, of mobile communications is kind of deeply detrimental. Although there's no kind of direct medical correlation that's been kind of clearly established. The same thing with the LED stuff. I mean, there are kind of like 3 layers of correlation, which are medically or kind of epidemiologically observable, but they're hardly kind of causality just yet. Although I think it kind of it also sort of feeds into people's general sense of suspicion around technology or around their environment. So like these message boards, of course, are like alive and well.
I think it's really interesting how you've taken, the escape as you want to escape the city, so you want to escape civilization, and then what are the metrics that you're using to try to understand its population, but then population centers, or you just point to where all the lights are, and you kind of see where the most people are. There's what we've generated. So then you're sort of embracing that point of you're going to the area with the least population, which on the map, on the satellite image, will show up, and as you said, in that portal score, that black hole, that dark spot.
But also increasingly, because of legislation, those dark spots are not necessarily without population, nor are they necessarily without infrastructure, right?
Sure.
And they may be places, and there are many places upstate that are like this, where a great amount of care has been taken to minimize the amount of kind of ambient illumination of the sky. So it's also not it's not a sort of project that is about locating places that are explicitly without design or without urbanism, but they're kind of maybe kind of explicitly designed conditions as well.
I think kind of playing off what Alexandra said earlier, and a little bit of what you just said, it is kind of funny to think of escaping from the city to go find darkness. Like you're some kind of like goth kid, like you're actually like literally escaping the lightness of like modernism and modernity. And so it's actually like kind of poetic in a way to be like just escaping to the darkness. But it actually has an architectural component, which is you're like getting out of the modern city.
Good. I thought this was a beautiful proposal too, mainly because I'm going to do exactly this over Christmas. I love being disconnected from it all, and I'm heading to the desert and sit in total darkness and a lot of sun during the day. So thank you for this presentation as well. Let's do a round of applause. I think these were great presentations, guys. So thank you very much to all of you. Great to see. I think we all have our plans cut out for the coming few years in terms of escapes. So thank you very much. Everybody that wants to try on one of these, I would suggest come up. I know that I want to. And also thank you to all of our respondents. Thank you.